Representative Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel, for being here. Great admiration for all of you. You know, this is, in reading over the material and studying this is something we've been trying to pin up for at least 10 years or more. And I don't think we got that rabbit pinned yet. How we do it's, of course, the big question. Let me start with the DCI and ask each of you to respond to that. Do you believe the DCI position needs to be elevated and separate from the CIA? I know that some of you have already testified to that, but I tell you, let's start with on the left, if you don't mind, and just go right down the line. General Odom.
I think he should be separated. I don't see it as so much as an elevation as it is a separation. It may have the appearance of an elevation if he does that, but I think he becomes trapped. The DCI becomes trapped if he's also directing an agency, and therefore he doesn't look at the community as a whole as much as he could. And I don't think things will improve much in the direction that I'm talking about until you do make that separation. How much additional authority you give him, I think that's a variable boundary. You might want to do more or less. My own view is that as the authorities now stand, a DCI, if he moved out, and he has to take some organizational capability with him. You can't just stand out there in an office and be a czar over in the White House. I would have an expanded National Intelligence Council, a rump part of the CIA, as sort of a reinforcement for him to focus in on problems such as terrorism that other people are not focusing on or neglected. And then he'll find out when he gets it going, other people will take it over and begin to do it sort of in a routine way. And that would give him and then his community management staff, he would have a pretty good organizational base, and he controls the programs of all these people. I'm not sure you can give him budget execution unless you in Congress rewrite the whole regulations for spending money in the various departments, because the Defense Department has expenditure rules, the Treasury Department has different ones, other people have different ones, and it seems to me that's just an administrative hurdle you have to deal with, but it's not all that critical if the exercise of program management authority is vigorously exercised.
But you would advocate keeping budget separate, budget authority.
Well, I'd leave the budget. I don't know how you would change the budget execution. That is, after the appropriations have gone out of here and been signed into law by the president, you give the intelligence agencies authority to spend their money. NSA is in the Defense Department, has to spend by Defense Department rules. And I don't see how, maybe you could change that and put it under a central authority. I'm not really sure. But it strikes me that that works pretty smoothly anyway. That where the real problem comes is in the program bill side and the program presentation to the Hill and what's hidden behind it, whether the input-output relationships are clear there.
Congressman Hamilton.
Congressman Everett, I go back for decades, really, and we've been talking about the DCI and the authority the DCI should have. And I think the general trend line has been that we want to increase the authority of the DCI. And I think in 1997, he was in fact given enhanced authority. I don't discount that, but I really don't think that's the solution either. I think the solution is to have one person, a director of national intelligence, who is over the entire intelligence community. That person should not be the DCI. He or she should not be the Defense Secretary, or he or she should not be the National Security Advisor. But I really think it's necessary now, given the importance of intelligence, and for accountability purposes, that you have a person who is identified as being the top person in the government on intelligence, to whom you can look and you know he has the authority in terms of management and budget and responsibility and accountability. So I see a director of national intelligence who would have control over much, if not all, of the intelligence budget. He would not be the DCI, he'd not be the National Security Advisor, would not be the Secretary of Defense. It's the only way you're going to get accountability into the system. It seems to me we do it that way for everything else in government. Why don't we do it in the intelligence community? Now, what I've said has huge problems in terms of the practicalities of getting it put into place. I recognize that, but you asked me what I thought ought to be done. That's what I think ought to be done.
And I appreciate that. Mr.
Yeah.
Webster.
This is one of the very few areas in which I find myself not entirely in agreement with Congressman Hamilton. I've been there. I've thought about the ability to function in both a detached DCI and a DCI that stays behind, and I'm not persuaded that that will create the kinds of synergetic improvements that you're looking for. I would put more emphasis upon finally addressing the lack of real authority that the DCI has over the intelligence community. He does not write the report cards on the agency heads. He does not even pick the agency heads. He has nominal authority over the budget, but I think it's really a matter of nominalness. In my years there, we tried very hard, and I got along pretty well with the agency heads, but we had to work at a consensus-building approach, even down to having our monthly luncheons at different agencies so that people wouldn't be concerned about CIA appropriating all the work, but had no real authority to make it happen. Occasionally, I would issue something that looked nominally like an instruction, but it was mostly hoping, with a lot of groundwork behind it, to hope something would come of it. If you're talking about the chairman of a think tank at the top, rather than someone who can, in effect, give orders and have somebody do something about it, then I think it's another reason why I don't think that's the kind of leadership that's going to be required. So the British have some models. I don't really feel they fit our situation here with all our checks and balances. I would strengthen the DCI. I would not have a head of a national intelligence unless that national intelligence was actually running something. But if he's off at the White House with no troops, it's difficult for me to see how it would be truly effective. I would look for ways to strengthen the role of the DCI in ways in which he does lead. Now, maybe that's going to mean someday that you're going to separate the two functions. But I don't know what you're going to give him to be effective in a room in the White House. I think you may be duplicating what goes on in the National Security Council.
Congressman Everett, I find myself on the side of Judge Webster on this one, and I'm too young to be cynical, but having seen a number of these reports, what we're talking about, the 800-pound gorilla that the Director of Central Intelligence has always had trouble wrestling to the ground, of course, is the Secretary of Defense, because of his authorities, responsibilities for the defense intelligence agencies. And I remember when the most recent report that had congressional participation that came in several years ago under Harold Brown was drafted after Les Aspin died. In the end of the day, Harold Brown, of course, a former Secretary of Defense, said that was just one nut they couldn't swallow. They recognized the need for the Secretary of Defense to have command authority to support the fighting man, and they weren't going to give that up. So maybe mine is just too much time spent observing how this has played out in years past. But I tend to agree with Judge Webster that if you call a Director of National Intelligence the overall head and you give him some budget authority and no comprehensive operational responsibility, and I wonder how you could give them operational responsibility to control all the entities that are trying to gather and analyze information in this vast intelligence world, I think you may be following the illusion of some kind of reform and not really getting the reality of it. It seems to me the Secretary of Defense and the defense agencies and the Director of Central Knowledge, this enhancement of the Director's authorities that you last looked at in '97, giving him a kibitzing power over the selection of the Director of NSA, and more collaborative powers with the Secretary of Defense. It may seem not a very dramatic resolution, but it may be the realistic one.
Well, this is interesting. We have different opinions there, and from people we respect very much. Mr. Webster, you're in a unique position. You've been both the DCI and head of FBI, right? No. Yes. When you were DCI, did you find yourself in turf battles with the NSA and CIA and RO and FBI?
Well, I tried to avoid that as much as possible.
I understand, but did you find yourself in some turf battles?
I would not define it as turf battle. I would define it as people sort of going their own way and not necessarily keeping you informed. There were issues. The one issue that was troubling to me was the correlation between the FBI and the CIA over counterintelligence. I established a counterintelligence center about 1988 after I went over to the DCI, and I filled it with seats from all of the principal agencies, including the FBI. But the FBI never assigned a permanent representative. I don't know what the concern was, that we were engaging in turf encroachment on their responsibilities. They had people who would come and attend meetings, but no secondees. Later, after problems with Aldrich Ames and other problems with respect to counterintelligence, the problem was solved by placing an FBI agent in charge of the counterintelligence center, and that seemed to resolve all the turf differences. I just give that as an anecdotal approach to how you can deal with some of these things. Defense is another issue because of the enormity, as Mr. Hitz pointed out, the enormity of their budget in relation to the total intelligence budget, and their special needs for isolated purpose for their military purposes, and their reluctance to yield up any of that. Much of NRO, the NSA, NEMA, a whole host of important intelligence agencies are under the Defense Department umbrella. And I would anticipate considerable resistance if any of the Scowcroft recommendations, for example, were seriously considered. It needs to be talked out. I don't think it's life and death, but I do think that the suggestions that have been made don't address that particular problem.
Of course, we haven't seen that report yet. Let me just mention that, and I have great admiration for your experience, and mine has not been near what yours has been. I've been here 10 years and 4 years investigation oversight chairman on the VA, but I must tell you that the turf battles I've seen firsthand in this place have been tremendous, and I'm almost certain that we do have them within in the community.
I'm sure that you do, but my experience over that whole period convinces me that it starts at the top. If the attitude of the leaders has a tremendous impact upon the people who work in those organizations, starting with the problems between the DCI Dulles and J. Edgar Hoover, and working their way through. If the people think it's not career enhancing to work together, they won't work together. I even went to the extent with Admiral Turner when he was DCI of publicly playing tennis together so that they would know that we got along, and we hoped they would get along. And then there have been other things. I think that Director Tennant and Director Mueller have worked very hard during this crisis to demonstrate that that's what they want, is cooperation and working together.
I must agree with you that they have worked very hard in that direction. General Odom, you wore the suit, but you were also the director of NSA. Did you tell me about your relationship at NSA with the Secretary of Defense? And not a long thing. Was it a good relationship, or? And also, who did you feel that your boss was? DCI or Secretary of Defense, or?
I had a very good relationship with Cap Weinberger. Anytime I wanted to see him, I could go in to see him. I always felt that I could do the same thing with Bill Casey and Bill Webster, who were the directors of Central Intelligence at the time. I just followed what were the legal definitions of the position. The DCI had two kinds of controls over me. He could really dictate a lot about my budget. As I tried to make clear in my testimony, I don't think any DCI has been served very well by staff because of the way it's organized. He can't see how to effectively use that power as much as it could be if you had a program budgeting approach. You'd have a lot more leverage if you had that. But that's something to be done within the community. The second point is I depended on the DCI and what was produced from his staff as my collection guidance. I didn't decide to collect signals in South America because I particularly like South America. You get it because the DCI has sent the National Signals Intelligence List out to you each year, telling you where to put your money and where he wanted the intelligence to come from. So I looked at Weinberger as my commander, but I looked at the DCI as my operational control. Now, in the military, we have that. We have unified commanders in Europe and East Asia and other places. General Franks, for example, is CENTCOM. He doesn't command those forces in the sense of a solid line. They can't.
Let me interrupt you just a moment. What part does the budget play in operational command?
It doesn't play. You've got two things going on. I tried to make the point in my testimony that there's an operational management issue and there's a resource management issue. They're different worlds. In the Defense Department, the services do resource management. The sinks do the operations. And you have that integrated, mixed up, not very well clarified within the intelligence community.
Then you wouldn't subscribe to the idea that whoever controls the budget controls the operational?
He who controls the program, yeah, sure. That's I would agree with that in principle, yeah. That's my point about the DCI. I think now, if he wants to, can have a big impact. He did in my day have a pretty big impact on what my budget was.
85% of the budget's over at defense.
Right, but how the programs, they fenced that budget. And then my budget was scrubbed by the community staff. They would go through that in great detail. There were particular cases where I saw very big signals intelligence programs in the NRO that we really didn't need. I couldn't take that money and move it. Instead, I just had to live with it.
Mr. Hamilton, would you talk about budget authority and how you see it and where it ought to be?
If you don't have the budget, you can't get anything done. The person who controls the budget controls the operation. And if you don't have budget authority, you are dramatically undercut in your ability to manage the operation. That's why the bureaucrats fight so hard over budget. Budget is power.
And you would put that budget control under the DCI? Or did I misunderstand you?
I would put it under a director of national intelligence, and that person would have real budget authority and real personnel authority. I wouldn't put him in a White House, as Judge Webster was suggesting. I think you've got to give him real authority. Now, the criticism made of my position is that it's unrealistic. You just can't get it done. That may be valid. That may be valid. But I wasn't approaching it that way. I was trying to think for my testimony how I would structure this in the best of all worlds, if you would. And that's the way you would do it. I am impressed by the fact that after September 11th, you have an altogether different national security environment. And that an institution like the FBI, which has previously been focused on law enforcement, has now been told that its number one responsibility, its number one priority is prevention. That means intelligence, because that's how you prevent. We're in a new world, and we have to begin to think of ways to structure this. I have heard the argument about strengthening the DCI for 35 years. Let's strengthen the DCI. Let's give him a little more authority. And I'm not against that. I think it's been helpful. It's a move in the right direction, but I don't think it gets us into the new era we're in.
Then you would let the DCI control the CIA.
The DCI would, yes, he would control the CIA. I don't think it's a good idea to, I think General Odom used the phrase double hat in your testimony earlier, head of Central Intelligence, head of all the intelligence. I don't think that works very well.
Thank you, gentlemen. I did not know it's not apologize. The red light is on. We spent an awful lot of time on this. As you said, it's been going for a number of years, but unless we find out how to head this thing up, I don't know how we'll accomplish anything down the road. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.